Am I okay at the back? Yeah. Right. Okay. I'm relieved to know that even people who do this every week or every day of the week, sometimes it doesn't work right. And I feel a little bit better as a journalist when I find there's the missing knot or something in a column I write, and just hope the subs will catch it. The revolution then changed everything because, of course, the West grew very rapidly. And we're now moving back to this more balanced relationship between the West and the rest, the West and the emerging world. And I think that's something that you could say we're becoming less important. But actually, I think we should relish this and cherish it, because it means the rest of the world is gaining some of the opportunities that we've had. However, within the developed world, the US will retain its primacy. A glance back in time, this is the size of the economies in GDP, the red lines, and the blue lines population in 1820, just as the Industrial Revolution was getting going. China, by then, by far the largest economy, India, a clear number two, then France, the UK, Russia. The US had hardly gotten going down there. So big population countries were the big GDP. GDP in the UK in 1820 was roughly 3 or 4 times that of India per head, not 20, 30 times. And this now is another graph, these oranges going back for 2,000 years. And if you look up at the top left-hand corner, you can see how India then was a third of the world's economy and China was a quarter. India, the gold bit at the bottom, China, the yellow, the sort of creamy bit coming up. And then if you look across these graphs, you can see 1820, bottom left-hand corner, India and China still half the world economy. Jump to 1950, middle of the bottom, China was 5%. India was 4%. The US was a third of the world economy, and Western Europe was a quarter, the blue bit. So you see, in that 130 years or so, there was just a radical shift of power. I'm a war baby. The world I grew up in was the world of the middle of the bottom of that graph. Now, project forward. These are some projections based on some work by HSBC. We'll look at that in a moment, which shows that China, on that count, roughly the same size as America, slightly larger probably. Europe down to 14% of the world economy, pretty much where it was in 1500. And India, 10%. So a partial swing back to the economic power relationship of 2,000 years ago. But of course, wealth per head, even then, still much lower in India and China than here. I've got the US and UK on the top, and this is wealth per head of India and China on the bottom. And you can see in 1500, the UK was quite a bit richer than China per head, but not so dramatically so. Same with India. And then neither moved forward at all. And one of the things as an economist I feel we did not do well in India was we did not increase GDP per head. We put in some infrastructure. We didn't really make the place richer. And that's troubling. China, self-inflicted wounds in many ways, maybe some wounds inflicted from the West, didn't get richer either. And then you see at the right-hand side of the graph, shooting up, so that China now in GDP per head is roughly where America was in the 1920s, and we were in the early 50s. India, where those Britain and America were around the turn of the last century, around 1900. So that's the sort of living standards they have now, and will go on rising over the next 30 years. Why are we so, we're aware of this now in a way which we were not really aware of 15 or 20 years ago. And the reason we're aware of it, I think, I take my hat off to them, is the work of Goldman Sachs, who invented the BRICS report, Brazil, Russia, India, China. And they invented this idea of creating an acronym. So now there's an annual BRICS summit. There's a BRICS development bank called the New Development Bank. They're trying to have reserve arrangements. They're trying to have a payment system. Yeah. So it was a really, I think it's the most interesting bit of work by a chap called Jim O'Neill, now Lord O'Neill, who was their chief economist. As an economist, this had no resonance of anything else that's happened, I think in my lifetime. And the problem was, though, the model was flawed. So economic models, you have to always, take with a pinch of salt. And this is what they predicted, that China would be in 2050 much, much larger than the US, that India would be a little smaller, then Brazil and Russia would be the next two in terms of size. Well, India and China have indeed whizzed on pretty fast, but Brazil and Russia have faded pretty catastrophically for Russia, and troublingly so for Brazil. So an economic model is only as good as the stuff you put into it. And I like economic models. Show you something in a moment. This is some forecasts from HSBC of what the world might look like in 2050. And they show China and India racing on, but Russia and Brazil flagging. But as I say, you take it with a pinch of salt. So this is the picture, and I still think it's the best shot I know of what the world might look like, with China probably a slightly larger economy than the US. India, number 3, then Japan, Germany, UK. Go down that list. Russia, number 13. The Russian economy, even before, this work was done before the invasion, even before that, lagging because of things like very low birth rates, inability to attract talented migrants. You don't really want to go and work there, and a political system that was a bit of a kleptocracy. And if you say, well, wait a minute, McRae, you spent a lot of your time working for the Independent, were they not owned by a former KGB plutocrat? And my answer is to say, yes, they've been actually very good owners, and there are some good plutocrats. And I say that, hand on heart. I've actually stopped writing for the India now, but not because of that. I've just write for the eye instead. It's a model. Take models with a pinch of salt, but use them as a way of thinking about the future. And I think it's always better to have something to start with, rather than just not having anything there and just making wild guesses. I then move now to these 5 forces for change, which is the sort of middle third of the book. There are other forces for change. These are just the ones I find easiest to corral my own ideas into. You start with demography. How many people will there be in the world? Where will they be? What's going to happen to age structures and so on? And the answer is getting older. But probably at some stage in the second half of this century, global population growth tails off. Maybe by 2050. Since I wrote the book, the new UN forecasts have come out, which suggest maybe coming down quicker, but we don't know. Are there enough resources in the environment are there enough resources to feed us and water us? Are we going to wreck the environment beyond repair? a hugely important issue. And again, I think my task, because there'll be people in the room who know more about this than I do, is to set out what we broadly know and what seems to me to be a sensible assessment. Trade and finance. Is globalization going to go into reverse? Is pushback against China going to reverse it? We've seen big reverses in our relationship with Russia. What might that become more serious? Technology will race forward and have both benign and sometimes less benign effects. And then ideas about government and governance, and these will shift. Big questions like, will we keep our faith in democracy? How will we create governance systems for the new technologies? How will we govern AI? So all those sorts of questions, I think, are really important. So as I say, I use these ideas to corral my own ideas into this, accepting that I will be making judgments that are wrong. So we start through them. We'll go through them all. Demography. Well, the developed world, our world is getting older. There's a sort of people who write about the demographic crisis or the aging crisis. I feel a little sort of uncomfortable about that, as I close in on the 8-0. And I've been into this room. Let's aging is not necessarily a bad thing. There's some advantages. There's some advantages of being around a bit. So let's not knock it. I don't like this idea that this is a catastrophe. However, it will change the developed world, some bits more than others. China aging even faster than we are. The one-child policy, I think, is one of the most catastrophic bits of social policy of any government in the world, because it brought forward the aging process. Chinese families are going to come smaller anyway. But it meant that, there was a shortage, and actually a big shortage of girls, for reasons which, kind of don't need to go into. India has become the world's most populous nation officially this year, probably about 5 years ago, because the data is always wrong, but it has become it officially this year. Africa, by far the youngest continent and the fastest growing in terms of population, which raises really interesting questions about, is Africa the great vibrant continent, or will it just struggle too much? And it's both a worry and a hope. But then what happens to wealth per head? Will that graph that I was showing with India and China go on rising, or wealth per head, and will Africa start catching up in wealth per head? Well, here are some population projections from the UN, and that shows India passing China now, as you can see. Shows Nigeria. Can you see the brown line shooting up? More people in Nigeria in 2050 than in the US. Is that right? Actually, it may not be. I think birth rates may start falling even faster in Nigeria than projected. But, we don't know. Russia not growing at all. That red line of China may come down much faster than it looks on that graph. The very latest revisions seem to be suggesting it will come down. It's already starting to fall. Maybe it will fall really fast. And if that's so, it's a really interesting thing for the. It is just possible China will not become the world's largest economy, or America will stay number one, or if China does pass, America will then repass China at some stage around 2050. But I don't know any of this. I just find it really, really fascinating that the possibility that China doesn't become number one. And how will they react to that when they've all been told China will be number one? And I'll talk about it a bit later, but I think one of the most important things will be what does happen to, does China calm down and go ex-growth and turn inward. And that's something, there's probably a China expert in the room or online. And if you know more about it, then tell me. I'm easy to reach. But I think it's a really interesting. So what's happening? Fertility rates, well, in Nigeria, they're still very high. Falling very fast in India. This is, by the way, in 1960 up to 50. So this is the past. This is a snapshot of the past. Data we really know about, not a projection. China already falling fast before the one-child policy came in. Germany, UK, very low. But the thing I find most interesting here on this graph is actually Nigeria. Will it stay so high? I was talking to a meeting in Abuja, capital of Nigeria, about 10 years ago. And it was astounding. I had half the cabinet sitting in the front row down here in front of me. And I was in as the visiting speaker talking about the future of the women. And it was a bit sticky. And I was sort of wondering, why on earth is this chap coming here at British Journals? Why are we spending our time listening to him? And I showed him this graph showing, all these children they had. And the whole room erupted into applause, and then you saw children in nation of birth. So, come down, but how fast? Big question. So, we can say quite a few things about population. What about the environment? 25 years ago, there were many challenges. Now, there still are many challenges, so we are focusing on one huge one. And I think the question here is, what can we reasonably be sure about? And will technology moving very fast save us? Technology is moving much faster than politics. And I suppose the bottom question is, we are making incremental advances. And you can do an awful lot just by following good practice. And if you say to me, McRae, okay, what are you doing? Well, we are planting quite a lot of trees. And I do actually, we have a house in Scotland, not a grand pile. And we have got a heat pump in there, and it's actually working very well. So you do a bit. Will incremental advance save us, or will we have to panic? If you're going to panic, better to panic early than panic late. I don't know. Well, here's some incremental advance. It's just some projections for electricity generation. Coal is the black bit. 1990, far side of the screen. Now, effectively, where we are, in the middle of the screen, 2050. Still some coal on the right-hand side. Still some coal in 2050, black bit, but solar and wind producing more than half of the. I think that's probably too pessimistic. I think solar and wind will be more than that. Yeah. And I think gas and hydro, gas and renewables will be down to probably less than a quarter of non-renewables, fossil fuels, less than a quarter of electricity production by then, and that's globally. Remember, not just the West, China and India too. So that's a bit of hope. This is the worry, and these are derived from the projections of the Glasgow COP. And they're pessimistic scenarios at the top. By the end of the century, a 4-degree increase in global surface temperature. The optimistic ones at the bottom, that we hold it down a bit higher than now. And I suppose common sense says we're somewhere in the middle. I don't know the answer to this. I know this is a profound worry. I have a son-in-law who's an environmental economist. He read the chapter, and he wrote me an email saying, Hamish, I'm really worried about what you're saying. You know, I think so and so and so and so is, you're wrong. I mean, it's quite say you're wrong. He's a lovely son-in-law, but he did sort of change my own view. So what I did was I actually lifted a bit of his email out and popped it straight into the book. So I think I think I've learned a lot from youth. So we'll see to talk about. Trade and finance. Well, has globalization peaked? Well, yes, it has. It actually peaked about 15 years ago. If you measure it by the proportion of goods and services traded as a proportion of the total world GDP. And we're all seeing, but you've heard of this new word, you've heard of offshoring, you've heard now of nearshoring, that is, you make it near. Janet Yellen, the US Treasury Secretary, had another one called friendshoring. I like that one. You get people you really like to make your stuff for you. There'll be trust shoring coming out. And we're seeing all sorts of changes taking place now where you try and make stuff nearer home just for reliability of supply. So I think that what will happen will be globalization will change its nature. We won't move goods around so much. We'll move the ideas of how to make those goods and the money to make them. So we will have a form of globalization which is less aggressively destructive of jobs, and something that we all feel more comfortable with. But then, okay, McRae, that's the optimistic bit. The pessimistic bit is, might we, as we are moving right now, into something more of a two-block world, China versus America, one block led by China, with all sorts of trade restrictions creeping up between the two, high-end chips. Okay. And that's, if it moves into an aggressively two-block world, that's very bad news. And then a final worry, are we going to lose the dollar? Are we going to lose currencies? Are we going to lose faith? This burst of inflation certainly decreases all of our faith in money. And taking on my sort of day-to-day journalist hat on, I just think it is a catastrophe from the arrogance of central bankers who just, how could they think zero interest rates were a good idea? They haven't been a good idea for the last several hundred years of economic history. I just think it's nuts. And it's just silly. If silly journalists like myself can manage to say this can't be right, why on earth couldn't these clever economists at the Bank of England and central banks around the world? So that's the trade in services. Trade in services, much smaller than trade in goods, but already growing before the present reverse. And by the way, I should say you'll all have copies of these slides if you want them. So if you want to take, and the push. Here's the reason for the pushback. This is the share of global goods exports through to 2021. Look at that red line, China, shooting up. It's the new kid on the block. It's the country that produces 2/3 of the world's socks. 2/3 of you in this room will have socks made in China. I'm actually wearing, I think, I'm wearing German ones at the moment, actually. They're really, really nice. They're given to my other son-in-law, but this is almost all of them has something made in China on us. And the UK and France and other countries going down. So that's what's created the row. Will we deal with it well? And this is, will we lose money? Here in Britain, we've got a very good run of data going back to the founding of the Bank of England in 1690 something. I ought to know the date. And we have what interest rates were on government stock from 1703 through to now. And, the money to finance, wars at the beginning of the 18th century cost the government, 8 or 10%. Then we went down, had that long flat period of interest rates being 2 or 3% for the government. Jumped up a bit in the First World War and Second World War. And then we had the madness, which I remember, starting work as a hack, of being very pleased I could get a 12.5% mortgage for our house in Islington. I'm a journalist, so I have to have a house in Islington. And then we had the madness, you see, at the bottom. Lower interest rates down to 0.5%, then any period in the previous 300 years can't be a good idea. Now we're back to some sort of normality. So if we lose faith in money, and I think we won't, but I think it's fingernail biting still. If we won't, then if we do, then it's due to this error. Technology races forward. Don't forget the benefits of incremental advance. And if you are in the emerging world, you're mostly using technology which was developed elsewhere in the West, and you are applying what there is around, and you increase your living standards by putting in what there is. But what increases our living standards is the frontiers. And what's happened is that we're really, really good at increasing productivity in manufacturing. We increase it by around 3% a year. And the quality of manufactured goods is really good. Buy a modern car, it doesn't go wrong. Buy one 30, 40 years ago, it went wrong the whole time. But technology has lagged in service industries, and it's much more difficult to apply technology to services. So when we ring up the bank and try and get an answer, it's clunky. Or we use their apps and we find we've sent our money to somewhere across the world and it's got into the wrong account and people can't get it back and it's a palaver. You go to a doctor and you have to have an appointment and you can't do the online appointment work. You buy or sell a house, conveyancing, nightmare. It takes weeks. It ought to be done just like that. Technology ought to be much, much better in service industries. And then the Holy Grail is maybe generative AI is that one technology that will enable us to improve quality and output in service industries in the same way that we've the moving production line and improved quality control in manufacturing. Don't know. My own guess is it is. I don't quite believe the hype. And you've probably all, gone on to these chat bots. And I mean, we tried to get globalization in the form of a Shakespearean sonnet. And it was totally brilliant. And I should have read it out, but it was wonderful. It rhymed, it scanned, and it agreed that as long as we were sensible, it was a good thing, but we had to regulate it. I think it's important. And of course, technology can change things. Have you all seen this one before? This was the inauguration of Pope Benedict the 16th in 2005, and he's somewhere in the very far distance, you see, and this is all people in Rome crowding forward. And then along in 2007 came an advance in technology. And this was Pope Francis 5 years later. Yeah, so it's just an example of how, and I don't know, if ever you've got a spare moment, Google Steve Jobs launching the iPhone, and it's just he comes on, he holds it up and says, every now and again, something comes along that changes everything, and this is it. But even Steve Jobs missed out on one trick. He couldn't envisage the selfie because that first iPhone didn't have a front-facing camera. So anyway, look, this is this huge money going into generative AI, and just this year, I just spent the morning writing a column about this for the Mail on Sunday of how the investment implications, and I think it's gone slightly mad. NVIDIA, the company that is one of the pioneers of it, shares increasing threefold this year. everyone, I think, has gone slightly mad, but it will change things. It will change things, and we don't know the detail. Finally, force for change number 5 is governance, and I think democracy will win out, but we have a crisis of confidence. I wonder whether, I don't know the answer to this. I wonder whether populism has been a good thing, and that it's allowed people to criticize the liberal elite and push them back and made them think about their. I don't know. But one thing we do know is everyone is better educated than ever before, better informed, healthier, living longer lives. That must be good, and that must surely be something that is good for democracy, because we're becoming a world of the middle class, and middle class will, I think, want democracy. And this, I think, is the final one of these sort of slides, which shows the proportion of the world's population, 1970 far side of the screen, now in the middle, 2050 right-hand side, that are middle class. And it's the big red band, are middle class. And they defined it by, I think it's something like half the median income of a poorer European country, half the median income of Portugal. So the sort of standard of living that we had in Britain in the 1950s or 1960s. Access to university, maybe 1960s, access to university, access to transport, good healthcare, reasonable life opportunities for the majority of people. And we're roughly half the world is middle class now by this definition, rich, the gold bit at the bottom. And these projections suggest that maybe 2/3 of the world will be, maybe even more, will have this sort of middle class opportunities in another 30 years' time. So I then jump to the risks, and I'm going to go through them, really just saying a couple of words about each, rather than going through in detail, because I think this is the sort of thing that we probably do better in conversation, and just pick out something if you want to talk. Grab me formally afterwards or informally, in the pub around the corner, whatever. There is a risk that US politics won't hold together. You have to acknowledge that. It held together by the skin of its teeth. I think it will hold together, but I have to acknowledge it may not. I think that the US and China may mismanage their relationship, but India may mismanage its relationship with China. You don't need to, two nuclear armed powers with border disputes. Pakistan on the other side. I wrote the third thing before the invasion of Iraq, of Ukraine. The invasion of Ukraine happened 3 days before I finally signed off the final copy of the hardback last May. And all you can do at that stage is just change a few words. And there's a whole section on how Russia might, and I use the sort of rather flip thing, might overplay its hand. And I could just put in a sentence saying this may be it. And I think my biggest fear, actually, fear number 3 has happened already, 4 days before I signed it off. And I didn't really change it much in the paperback. That wouldn't be fair. I slightly just sharpened up from what we knew, not yet knowing the outcome. Sub-Saharan Africa, not escaping poverty. I worry about religious conflict. I'm not good on religion. I'm not an expert, but I worry. Environmental degradation, we just lose it. And that would be profoundly worrying. There will be pandemics. We just hope we cope well with them. I worry about the Middle East. As a journalist, I can't argue against information, but I can see the malign effects of it if it's not properly policed. We need more watchdogs. And we lose faith in democracy. Could happen. I don't think so, but could happen. Here are the more positive judgments, and it's implicit in what I said already. A middle-class world will be a safer world. I really think the US will grapple with its problems and become calmer, more self-confident, and as a leader of the Anglosphere, we will play a useful secondary role. I think, you say, where do people want to emigrate to now? Want to go to America? Want to come here? Want to go to Australia? Want to go to Canada? Might want to go to Germany, for the job. Don't want to go to China. Don't particularly, might go to the Middle East. But, Anglophone countries are magnets for talent. And I hope we remain magnets for talent and nurture and develop and work in that way. Europe, I think, will move to a core on the periphery. I think something called the EU will survive, but it'll change its nature. There's no final form. And I think our own relationship with Europe will become calmer and more cooperative. The big one, two big ones. China, when it becomes older, will start to want to look after its own people more and not want to conquer the world in an aggressive way. And I may be wrong, but I think at some stage in the 2030s, there's going to be some discontinuity in China. And that will, it will become an easier place to deal with for us. And it will become a place which works harder to give a decent life for its middle-class citizens. And I know contacts in China that suggest to me that that's desperately what they want, but they can't quite get it yet. So we'll see. India, I know better than China. I've been much more often. I love it. I respect it. I admire it. But my word, it's a bumpy ride. I think it will seize its prize, but it has to do lots of things. Africa. In Africa will inevitably become more important. And I just hope it manages to become more important in positive ways. Globalization, we don't kill globalization, we turn it. And technology becomes to the rescue in many fields, most notably in the environment. And that leads to the final thought that we do learn to have a more harmonious relationship with our planet. Last slide. I started with Robert Louis Stevenson and The Journey. This is Barack Obama. I love this thought. Suppose, paraphrasing it, suppose you were you could choose when to be born. You'd know nothing. You know whether you're going to be a boy or a girl. You wouldn't know whether you'd be rich or poor. You wouldn't know your religion. You wouldn't know whether you'd be within a developed country or an emerging country. You know nothing, nothing. What would be the moment that would give you your best life chances? And the answer actually is now. For us in this room, some people say, oh, it really would have been better to have been born in the 1950s, be a baby boomer and have a lovely house. And, yeah, but you had a 6% chance of going to university. So, all right, for some, not much fun to have been born in China at that stage, with the Cultural Revolution and the Great Leap Forward still ahead of you. See what I'm saying? That I do, and I cling to this. I really cling to this. The world will become a better place. And my hat off to Barack Obama for choosing to highlight that. So thank you so very much. Been a joy, pleasure. Nice to meet you.